Don't you touch him. Her voice didn't shake. It cut sharp and absolute through the crash of shattering glass, through the shouting, through the dead silence that followed. Emily stood between the drunk man and the child, wine bleeding through her uniform, her arms still raised, her feet planted like she'd been rooted there her whole life. The little boy behind her hadn't moved. And across the table, the most dangerous man in the room, a man whose name made restaurant managers lose sleep, was staring at her. Not with anger, with something she couldn't name. Something that frightened her far more than the drunk ever could. If you've ever done the right thing and had no idea what it would cost you, this story is for you. Subscribe, drop your city below, and don't you dare leave before the end. Nobody warned Emily that tonight would change her life. They warned her about the reservation. They warned her about the name on it. They warned her to smile less, speak less, exist less, to become nothing more than a pair of hands that refilled glasses and disappeared. But nobody, not Harold, not the kitchen staff, not the two stone-faced men already seated in the private room when she arrived, nobody told her that a little boy with serious eyes and a drawing of a horse was going to hand her a piece of paper that would reroute everything she thought her future looked like. She didn't know that yet. She just knew she was tired. 9 hours into a double shift, and her feet had stopped hurting, the way feet stop hurting when the pain has been going on so long, the body simply stops reporting it. She'd been at Rosario's since noon. She'd refilled the breadbasket on table 7. 4 times, talked a couple at table 12 through the entire dessert menu, twice before they ordered nothing, and dropped a fork just once, but in the particular ringing silence that only exists in an extremely expensive restaurant, and had felt the weight of every set of eyes in the room land on her like a physical thing. She was good at her job. She'd learned to be. Rosario's didn't keep staff who weren't. But she'd been a teacher once, and some nights, the long ones, the doubled shifts, the nights that blurred at the edges, she could feel the distance between who she was now and who she used to be. Like a bruise, she kept pressing to remind herself it was real. Don't think about that, she told herself, lifting a fresh tray. Think about the tips. She was thinking about the tips when Harold caught her arm. Emily. Harold's voice was the voice of a man who had already sweated through one shirt today and was working on the second. His hand on her arm was tighter than it needed to be. The private room. Tell me you know who that reservation is. I don't, she said. Harold closed his eyes. He opened them. He glanced toward the frosted glass door at the end of the corridor like it might suddenly become transparent and give him strength. Castiano, he said. She waited for more. He seemed to think that one word should have been enough. Harold, she said carefully. That name means nothing to me. Should it? Yes, he said. Absolutely yes. Emily, these people are, they are not. You do not speak to them unless they speak to you first. You do not make eye contact. You do not linger. You come in, you put things down, you leave. You are wallpaper. You are air. You are absolutely nothing. Do you understand me? I'm a waitress, Emily said, not a hostage negotiator. I think I can handle a private dinner. Harold's face did something complicated. I really genuinely hope so, he said, and he let go of her arm, and she could see that his hands were actually trembling slightly, and that more than anything else he'd said gave her a small, cold tap of unease somewhere behind her sternum. She went in anyway. She pushed the door open with her back tray level on both palms, and the first thing she felt was the change in temperature. Not physical temperature. Something else. The way a room feels when the people in it are used to rooms adjusting around them. There were 4 of them. 2 men she categorized immediately as security positioned, not seated though they were at the table. The posture gave it away. The careful way they held themselves even at rest. A woman in her 50s, silver hair, a single piece of jewelry at her throat, the kind of stillness that isn't calm, but is something older and more considered than calm. And the man at the head of the table. She knew it was him before she could have said how. Not because he was the most physically imposing though he was, and not because of some cinematic quality to the moment. It was simpler than that. It was that everyone else in the room, however subtly, was oriented toward him, the way objects orient toward gravity, not with fear exactly, with the kind of unconscious acknowledgement that certain people command without doing anything to earn it in the moment, because they earned it long before you walked in. Dominic Castiano. He was already looking at her. Not the way men at tables in expensive restaurants usually looked at her, through her, around her, or with the reflexive entitlement of someone who's decided that service staff are furniture. He was looking at her with actual attention. Quiet, direct, and completely unself-conscious about it. Like he simply wanted to see what she was, and he didn't see any reason to pretend otherwise. She held his gaze for half a second, long enough to be a mistake if he was the kind of man who didn't like being looked at, and then she let her eyes move to the rest of the table. That's when she saw the boy. He was pressed close to Dominic's side, the particular closeness of a child who has learned that the world sometimes requires putting your back against something solid. He was small for what she guessed was 8 or 9, with dark hair that fell across his forehead, and he had a piece of paper in front of him, the back of the breadbasket liner, and a pencil stub gripped in his hand, and he was drawing something with a focus so intense that he hadn't looked up when she came in. That more than anything was the thing that made the room feel real to her. A little boy drawing horses, while the adults around him held the room like a court. "Good evening," Emily said. "My name is Emily. I'll be taking care of you tonight. Still or sparkling? May you adapt." The first 40 minutes were flawless. She moved the way Harold wanted, efficiently, quietly, frictionlessly. In and out, refill before it was needed, anticipate before it was asked. She'd done this long enough that it had become a kind of muscle memory, a rhythm that ran underneath conscious thought the way breathing does. But Antonio kept watching her. Not obviously. He had the particular subtlety of a child who has spent a lot of time around adults who notice things and has learned to absorb the habit. He didn't stare. He glanced quick, assessing, curious, and every time she looked his way, he'd already looked back down at his drawing. The third time she came in, she caught a glimpse of the fictional, a horse. Careful, deliberate lines, not a child's scribble, something more patient than that. She wanted to say something. She didn't. She was wallpaper. She was air. She was Harold's least consequential employee, existing for the sole purpose of not being noticed. She went back to the kitchen. She heard him before she saw him. The laughter was a particular kind, that loose, self-impressed sound that only exists at a very specific level of drunk, when a man has just enough alcohol in him to believe he's being charming and not nearly enough self-awareness to know he isn't. She was coming out of the kitchen, tray in hand, when the sound of the private room door hitting the wall reached her, and she was already moving before she fully processed why. She came around the corner and stopped. The man in the doorway was heavy-set suit, rumpled face flushed, the particular red of someone who'd been drinking since early evening. He was holding a nearly empty glass at an angle that was distributing its contents slowly across the threshold carpet, and he was pointing at Dominic with the arm that held it. "There he is." The voice was enormous, sloppy, confident. "Castiano, you remember me? We've got unfinished business, you and I. You remember what you said to me at the Hargrove dinner." You think I forgot that?" Dominic hadn't moved. This, Emily would later think, was the most frightening part. Not the drunk man's noise, but the absolute glacial stillness of the man at the head of the table, like something that has decided it does not need to react yet because it will absolutely get to react later, and there is no version of this story where it doesn't. The two security men had shifted in their seats. The elegant woman had gone very still. Antonio had looked up from his drawing, and the drunk man's arm, already unstable, already arcing wide as he gestured, Emily saw it. She saw the wine moving toward the rim. She saw the direction of it. She saw the boy directly in its path, small and unprepared and too close to the edge of the table to get out of the way in time. She didn't think. She moved. Later, she would not be able to fully account for the 4 seconds that followed. She was across the room. She had her hand around the drunk man's wrist, not hard, not aggressive, but certain, and she was between him and Antonio. And the glass was already tipping, had already tipped, and the wine was going the only place it could go, which was all over her. Down her uniform, across her left forearm, cold and red and immediate. The boy was dry. Emily stood in the silence and felt the wine drip from her elbow onto the marble. Drip, drip, drip. "Let go of me," the drunk man said, but the bravado had compressed into something smaller. He'd felt how steady her grip was. He'd registered she thought that she wasn't afraid of him. "No," Emily said, "just that, one syllable." The drunk man looked around the room. He seemed to become aware of several things at once, where he was, whose dinner he had walked into, what the expressions of the people in the room meant, and the color drained from his face with remarkable speed. "Sir," Emily said, and her voice was so level it almost frightened her too, "you're going to walk out of this room right now, and you're not going to come back." "Do you know who I'm?" "I know exactly who you are," she said, which was a complete lie. "And it doesn't matter. Walk out." He walked out. The security man nearest the door was already behind him, and the door closed and the room was silent again. Emily stood there. She could feel her heartbeat now catching up to what her body had done. Her hands were steady. She was surprised by that, but something behind her knees felt liquid and uncertain. "Miss," the voice came from the head of the table. She turned. Dominic Castiano was looking at her. He hadn't moved. She'd registered that somewhere, some peripheral awareness, that he hadn't stood, hadn't intervened. And she'd filed it away without understanding why. Now facing him fully, she understood that the stillness wasn't passivity. It was something else entirely. Something that watched and cataloged and measured and had already arrived at several conclusions before the person being measured had finished speaking. "Are you hurt?" he said. The question surprised her so thoroughly that she answered before she thought about it. "No, I'm fine. It's just, are you hurt?" Not louder, not harder, but the second time it landed differently, like a sentence that meant exactly what it said and expected an answer of equal precision. "No," she said, "I'm not hurt." "What's your name?" She felt it again, that small cold tap. Something telling her that her name once given here would not be forgotten. "Emily," she said. "Emily Caldwell." Dominic looked at her for 3 full seconds. She counted without meaning to. Then he picked up his fork and went back to his dinner. And Emily walked out of the room with her pulse in her ears and red wine drying on her skin, and absolutely no understanding of what had just happened. In the kitchen, Harold was vibrating. "What did you do?" He grabbed her arm the moment she came through the door. "You touched someone. You physically restrained a guest in the Castiano family's private—" "I stopped a man from dumping wine on a child," Emily said. She reached past him for a cloth. "That's what happened. If that's a problem, Harold, I'm happy to hear you explain how the alternative was better." "You don't understand? Then explain it to me." He couldn't. He opened his mouth closed. It pressed both hands flat against the stainless steel counter like he needed something to hold on to. "Just," he exhaled, "just go back in, be normal, be nothing, please." "That's what I'm doing," Emily said. She picked up her tray. She re-entered the room and everything was exactly as it had been, except for one thing. Antonio had folded his drawing in half. When she came to take the dessert plates, he was watching her with the same careful measuring attention his father had. The genetic resemblance was in that moment almost striking. As she reached past him, he held the folded paper out. "This is for you," he said. Barely above a whisper, she took it, opened it carefully. The horse, but now there was a figure beside it, small, with a ponytail, standing very straight. It took her a breath to realize it was meant to be her. "Because you didn't run away," Antonio said. Emily's throat did something complicated. She looked at him, this serious, careful child in this room full of weight and danger and silence, and she said, "Thank you. I love horses." "Me too." A tiny pause. "Dad won't let me have one." From the other end of the table without inflection, "We live in a penthouse, Antonio. Ooh, you could buy a building with a stable. That's not how buildings work. You could make it how buildings work." This time Emily was close enough to the head of the table to see it, the very small, very contained movement at the corner of Dominic's mouth. Not a smile. The ghost of one, like a door that had opened 1 inch and immediately closed again. "Good night, Emily," Dominic said. "Good night. Not thank you, not that'll be all. Good night," like she was someone he expected to see again. Emily folded the drawing and put it in her pocket. She said good night. She left. Her phone rang at 11:22 p.m. She was in the staff room with her coat half on and her feet aching and her mind doing the math she did every night, what she'd made tonight versus what she needed, what the difference was, how many shifts it would take to close that gap, whether it was ever going to close at all. Unknown number. She answered. "Miss Caldwell?" Professional, male, accented, not Dominic's voice, but carrying the same quality of precision. "Mr. Castiano would like to meet with you tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. A car will be sent." Emily went very still. "What for?" she said. A pause. brief and carefully neutral. He didn't specify. He asked me to make the call. She sat down on the bench. She held the phone and looked at the wall and thought about the wine drying on her uniform and the drawing in her pocket and the way Dominic Castiano had said her name, Emily Caldwell, like it was information he intended to keep. Okay, she said. She didn't sleep. The building was midtown, unremarkable from the outside glass steel, any law firm in the city generic. But inside, once she'd given her name and been escorted up in an elevator that moved in complete silence, the feeling was different, contained, like a place that had been very deliberately insulated from the texture of normal life. The office was a corner room on the 40th floor. Dominic was standing, not behind the desk by the window, jacket off, sleeves rolled, and he turned when she came in with the same unhurried attention he'd given her every other time. And somehow that consistency, the fact that he looked at everyone and everything the same way, like it deserved his actual focus, was more unsettling than if he'd been performing authority. Miss Caldwell. He gestured toward the chairs, not behind the desk, beside it. Thank you for coming. She sat. He sat across from her, angled toward her, close enough that she was aware of it. How long at Rosario's? He asked. 3 years. Before that, she measured her answer for half a second. Teaching, 4th and 5th grade. Something moved behind his eyes, fast, but she caught it. Why did you leave? My mother got sick. She kept her voice even. I needed to be in the city. The tips at Rosario's are better than a public school salary. How sick? It wasn't phrased as a question. It was phrased as someone who has already decided they want the real answer and is just making space for it. Degenerative condition, Emily said. Progressive. She needs specialist medication and eventually residential care. I've been saving for 3 years and I'm not... She stopped. I'm not there yet. Dominic nodded once. He didn't look away from her face. He didn't offer the small, sympathetic sound that people usually offered. At this point in the conversation, the reflexive, I'm sorry, that always felt like a door closing rather than opening. He just absorbed the information and held it. Antonio hasn't kept a tutor in 2 years, he said. Not for lack of trying on my part. He's been through 4 since his mother left. The last one lasted 4 months. The one before that, 6 weeks. Why are you telling me this? Because last night he gave you a drawing. Dominic paused. He hasn't drawn anything for someone outside this household in over a year. The quiet warmth moved through her again, the same thing she'd felt when a child in her classroom had reached for her after weeks of pulling away. She'd missed that. She hadn't realized how specifically she'd missed it until it was back. What are you offering? She asked directly. He told her. The salary made her breath stop. The medical coverage, her mother's specialists, her medication, her transition to residential care. All of it made her eyes sting in a way she refused to let go any further. Why? She said. Her voice was very controlled. You don't know me. No, he said. I don't. He looked at her steadily. But Antonio apparently does. And I have learned not easily to trust his instincts about people. She let that settle. Then she said, Mr. Castiano, before I say anything, I need to know what I'm actually walking into. Not the salary, not the terms. What world is this? What am I agreeing to exist inside of? The silence lasted 3 seconds. And then Dominic Castiano leaned forward slightly precisely and said, that is exactly the right question. He reached for the folder on his desk. Emily Caldwell, running on 3 hours of sleep and a life she'd been hemorrhaging for 3 years, leaned forward too and listened. She said yes. She told herself it was for her mother. She told herself it was practical, rational, the only available answer to a problem that had been compounding interest on itself for 36 months. She almost believed it. She believed it right up until she reached the sidewalk outside and put her hand in her coat pocket and found the drawing, the horse, the small, straight-backed figure with the ponytail, and stood there in the afternoon light, holding it in both hands. Because you didn't run away. She thought about that. She thought about the 42nd floor office and the man who'd looked at her like she was worth actually seeing, and the boy who'd spent a year not drawing for anyone, and then in the space of 20 minutes had drawn her. She folded the paper carefully. She put it back. She started walking. She didn't look back. She would later understand that this was the thing he'd noticed. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that in the 40 floors above her, Dominic Castiano was still at his window. That he had watched her come out of the building and turn left and walk with the particular posture of a person who has made a decision and is not second-guessing it. She didn't know that he had not watched anyone and they'd leave that building in over 2 years. She didn't know what that meant to him. She didn't know yet, but she would. Thursday came faster than Emily expected and slower than she was ready for. She'd spent Wednesday in a state of controlled dissociation, going through the motions of her regular shift at Rosario's, refilling water glasses and reciting the specials, and smiling at people who didn't look at her face, all while some background process in her mind quietly ran and reran the conversation in the 40th floor office. The salary, the medical coverage, the folder Dominic had handed her, which contained Antonio's academic records, his previous tutor's notes, a weekly schedule, and a single handwritten line at the bottom of the last page that she'd read 3 times before folding it away. He responds to honesty. Don't pretend with him. He always knows. She hadn't slept much Wednesday night either. The car arrived at 8:47 a.m. Not 9, not 8:30, 8:47 exactly, which told her something about the kind of household she was entering, one where precision wasn't a preference but a baseline expectation. The driver introduced himself as Sal. He was somewhere in his 60s, compact and unhurried, and he said exactly 4 words to her during the entire ride. Good morning, Ms. Caldwell. Then nothing. She didn't push it. The penthouse was in a building on the Upper East Side that had the particular quality of places that don't need to announce themselves. No logo above the entrance, no obvious security visible from the street, though she had the distinct sense it was there anyway, present, the way certain things are present, not seen but felt like pressure. She was met in the lobby by a woman named Claire, late 30s, professional, the kind of efficient warmth that suggested she'd learned to be warm the same way Emily had learned to be invisible, because the alternative had costs. Claire walked her to the elevator up to the top floor and then stopped at the apartment door and said, Antonio knows you're coming. He's been up since 6. Then she paused and added something that wasn't in her professional register. He asked me twice what time you'd be here. I thought you should know that. Emily nodded. Her throat was tight in a good way. Thank you, she said. Claire knocked twice and opened the door. Antonio was sitting at the kitchen table with a book open in front of him that he was very obviously pretending to read. He looked up when Emily came in, and the careful neutrality on his face, the practiced "I wasn't waiting" expression, lasted approximately 2 seconds before something quieter and more honest replaced it. You came, he said. I said I would, Emily said. He considered this. People say things. I know, she said. I came anyway. He looked at her for another moment, that same measuring quality she'd seen in the restaurant, the instinct for reading people that seemed to have come standard with the Castiano DNA, and then he pushed the chair beside him out slightly with his foot. An invitation. Wordless, casual, like he'd done it 100 times. Like he was pretending he hadn't just done something deliberate. She sat. What do you want to start with? He asked, tone carefully indifferent. What do you want to start with? He blinked. The other tutors always had a plan. I have a plan, Emily said. The plan is to find out what you actually know before I assume. That's step 1. And step 2 depends on step 1. Antonio stared at her. Then very slowly the corner of his mouth moved, and it was the exact same micro-expression she'd seen on his father's face in the restaurant. The door opening 1 inch and almost closing again, but not quite. Not all the way. Okay, he said, just that. But he reached for his pencil. They worked for 2 hours. It became clear within the first 20 minutes that Antonio's previous tutors had made a consistent mistake. They'd seen a quiet, contained child who didn't volunteer answers and concluded he didn't know them. He did. He almost always did. He just didn't see the point in performing knowledge for people who'd already decided what he was. Emily caught this on the 3rd question she asked when he gave her a half-answer, technically correct, deliberately incomplete, and she said without inflection, You know the rest? Why'd you stop? He looked up from the page. You can tell. Yes. A pause. Mrs. Harmon always wrote down whatever I gave her and moved on. Mrs. Harmon sounds like she had a lot going on, Emily said. Antonio almost smiled. Almost. She cried once in the bathroom. I heard her. Rough day. I think it was me, he said without particular guilt. Just observation. Were you being difficult on purpose? He was quiet for 2 seconds, then a little. Why? Another pause longer this time. He turned his pencil over in his hand, a fidget. She noted not restlessness, but thinking. Because she didn't actually want to be here, he finally said. She wanted the money, and I knew it. And I didn't want to. I didn't want to give her things when she wasn't actually... He stopped. When she wasn't actually interested in you, Emily finished quietly. He didn't answer, which was an answer. Okay, Emily shifted. She reached over and turned the book to a different chapter. Tell me what you actually think about this. Not the answer, what you think. He looked at the page. He looked at her. Something in his face shifted, the last bit of protective neutrality dropping away like a coat he'd been wearing too long, and he started talking. And once he started, she understood what his father had meant. He was extraordinarily bright with a particular quality of intelligence that manifests not as speed, but as depth. He didn't arrive at ideas quickly. He arrived at them fully with the kind of structural understanding that most children his age couldn't access because they'd never been asked to try. Emily listened. She asked questions. She pushed back when he was lazy and let him run when he was building towards something. She forgot about the wine-stained uniform and the 40 floors and the name that made restaurant managers sweat. She forgot for 2 hours that this was anything other than what she was supposed to be doing with her life. She almost didn't hear him come in. Dominic had the particular quality of presence that announces itself without sound. She became aware of him, the way you become aware of a change in air pressure, a subtle shift in the atmosphere of a room. She looked up, and he was standing in the doorway, jacket, on which meant he'd either just arrived home or was about to leave, and he was watching the two of them with an expression she couldn't fully read. It wasn't the calculating attention from the restaurant. It was something quieter, more private. Antonio hadn't noticed him yet. He was still mid-explanation, pencil moving across the page, working through a logic problem Emily had given him 3 minutes ago. Dominic caught Emily's eye. He didn't speak. He just held it for a moment, that look. Then he nodded once and stepped back from the doorway. Gone. Emily looked back at Antonio, and that's why the answer can't be 47. Antonio was saying with the satisfied certainty of someone who has just proven something to themselves as much as to anyone else. Because the first number was already... He stopped. You weren't listening. I was, Emily said. You were explaining why 47 doesn't work. He gave her the skeptical look. You look distracted. I'm never distracted, she said. Finish. He finished. She checked his answer. It was right, and more than right. He'd found a shorter path to it than the textbook suggested, which she pointed out. And the way his face changed when she said it, the quiet, almost disbelieving pleasure of being seen accurately landed in her chest with a weight she carried for the rest of the morning. She ran into Dominic in the hallway on her way out. Not accidentally, she understood immediately it wasn't accidental. He was there with the particular deliberateness of a man who has arranged to be somewhere and is pretending he hasn't. How was he? Dominic asked. Good, Emily said. Better than good. He's been sandbagging for 2 years. Dominic's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Meaning he's been giving his tutors 60% of what he actually knows, and they've been writing reports based on 60%, and everyone has concluded he has a problem when what he actually has is a very finely tuned sense of who's worth his full effort and who isn't. She paused. He's been protecting Papa Selpin. The silence lasted 4 seconds. He does that, Dominic said quietly. It wasn't surprised. It was the voice of someone recognizing a pattern they know too well. I noticed, Emily said. He comes by it honestly. She didn't mean it as an accusation. She wasn't entirely sure what she meant it as. But Dominic looked at her sharp present and something else, and for a moment the hallway felt very small. Thursday and Saturday next week, he said. Same schedule. I'll be here, she said. She left. In the elevator, she pressed the lobby button and then stood very still and breathed and told herself the thing she was feeling was professional satisfaction and nothing else whatsoever. She told herself this several times. She was mostly convinced by the time the doors opened. The weeks developed a rhythm. Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays, the car at 8:47, Claire at the door, Antonio at the table with his preemptive book and his too casual chair push. The sessions expanded naturally, 2 hours becoming 3, the academic work bleeding into conversations that weren't strictly academic but were. Emily was increasingly certain more important. Antonio asked questions the way people do when they've been storing them up for a long time, practical and philosophical, and occasionally devastating in their honesty. "Do you think people can change?" he asked her one Thursday about 6 days in. They were on math, which he'd set aside, which usually meant something else was actually happening. "Yes," Emily said. "My last tutor said people are basically who they are." "Your last tutor also cried in the bathroom," Emily said. Her philosophy might have been informed by a bad week. He didn't almost smile this time. He actually smiled small and quick, and it was a completely different landscape than almost. "Do you think my dad can change?" Emily set her pencil down. Carefully. "What makes you ask that?" Antonio was quiet for a moment. He turned his pencil over, thinking. "He used to laugh more. Before my mom left. I remember it. He doesn't do it anymore." A beat. "I think he thinks that part of him went with her." The quiet in the room after that was the kind Emily knew to let sit. "Do you think that?" she asked. "No," Antonio said, with the certainty of someone who has considered it carefully. "I think he locked it up. I think there's a difference." He looked at her. "What do you think?" She looked back at him. 8 years old, maybe, with his father's eyes and his own impossible depth. "I think," she said carefully, "that you might be the smartest person in this apartment." "I'm the only person in this apartment right now." "I'm aware," Emily said. "Pick up your pencil." He picked it up, but he was still almost smiling. She saw Dominic in this hallway after nearly every session. Always with that quality of deliberate coincidence, the folder he needed from the study, the call he was just finishing, the coffee he happened to be making. She cataloged these encounters the way she cataloged things she didn't want to examine too directly, carefully sideways in her peripheral attention. He asked about Antonio. She told him honestly. He listened in a way that most people didn't, not waiting for his turn to speak, but actually processing, and sometimes what he said back surprised her because it was never defensive and rarely predictable. "He told me today that his last tutor was afraid of him," she said one Thursday, pulling on her coat. Dominic leaning against the wall with his coffee went very still. "Afraid." His word. Emily zipped her coat. "I think he's right. I think several of them were. He's very perceptive. And perceptive children can be intimidating to adults who aren't comfortable being seen." "And you're comfortable being seen?" The question landed in a way she hadn't expected. She looked up from her coat. He was watching her with that direct, unhurried attention, the look that meant he actually wanted the answer. "I got comfortable with it when I had a classroom full of kids who could tell in 30 seconds if I was faking," she said. "You learned fit." "Or you quit," Dominic said. "Or you quit," she agreed. He looked at her for another moment, something in his face, that controlled, weathered face that had spent years being readable only to itself, was doing the thing she'd first noticed in the restaurant. The door opening 1 inch, not closing again quite as fast as it used to. "Have dinner with us," he said. "Saturday, after the session." Emily blinked. "Mr. Castiano." "Dominic." He said it without emphasis, like it was a correction he'd been waiting a reasonable amount of time to make. "Dominic." The name felt strange in her mouth. Real. "I don't think that's," Antonio asked. He said, simply, matter-of-factly, and then after the smallest pause, "I'm asking too." She stood in the hallway and heard the words and felt the specific weight of what they represented, the shift from professional arrangement to something else. Something with no clean borders or clear rules. Something that the part of her brain running constant risk assessments was already flagging with serious urgency. "Okay," she said. She didn't know why she said it, or she did know and wasn't ready to say so. Dinner was in the dining room, the three of them, and it was unexpectedly, disarmingly normal. Antonio talked. He had opinions about everything, delivered with the confidence of a child who has been taken seriously by at least one adult and is still a little drunk on the discovery. He had opinions about the pasta, about the math concept Emily had introduced that afternoon, about a documentary he had watched with Claire on Tuesday, about deep-sea fish that could produce their own light. Bioluminescence, he said. Bioluminescence, Emily confirmed. I want to learn about it. That's biology. Can we do biology? We can do biology. He looked at his father. She's better than the others, he announced with the total lack of ceremony that only children can achieve. Dominic looked at Emily over his wine glass. Something lived in his expression for a moment, warm, private, like something he'd stopped allowing himself and was allowing again carefully. The way you might put weight on a healed break. Just a little. Testing it. I know, he said. Emily looked at her plate. Antonio, who missed nothing, looked between them, said nothing, picked up his fork with the satisfied expression of someone whose plan is proceeding on schedule. She would think about that later. The plan. The 8-year-old's plan. She would think about it and laugh alone in her apartment at 11 o'clock at night and then stop laughing because it would occur to her that it was working. The crack in Dominic's composure happened on the following Tuesday. She hadn't expected it. She hadn't expected anything. Really, she'd arrived the same way she always did. Had a session with Antonio that went long because they'd gotten sidetracked into a genuinely fascinating conversation about prime numbers and why they existed, and was gathering her things when she came into the kitchen and found Dominic sitting at the table. Not working, not on the phone, just sitting with his hands flat on the surface and his eyes somewhere far away, and he looked for the first and only time since she'd known him tired. Not physically, the other kind, the kind that lives behind the eyes. He looked up when she came in and the mask went up fast, practiced, but not quite fast enough. She'd already seen it, and they both knew she'd seen it. She could have pretended she hadn't. The polite thing, the professional thing, was to pretend. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. He looked at her. You don't have to. I know, she said. What happened? He was quiet long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, Antonio's mother called this morning. A pause. She does this twice a year. She calls, she tells him she'll visit, she gives him a date. Another pause longer. She hasn't made the date yet. Once in 3 years. Emily absorbed this. She thought about the child in the other room, the serious face, the careful drawings, the question about whether people could change. She thought about the way Antonio sat close to his father's side. The particular closeness of a child who has learned that some people leave and some people stay, and you hold on to the ones who stay. He knows she won't come, Dominic said. His voice was very controlled. He knows. He's known since the second time, but he stopped. He still hopes, Emily said. Dominic looked at her, and the door was open wider than she'd ever seen it, wider than she thought he knew it was open, and what was behind it wasn't what she'd expected. It wasn't calculation or danger, or the cold authority of a man who controlled rooms just by existing in them. It was something much simpler and much older than all of that. It was just a father watching his son carry something he couldn't carry for him and not knowing what to do with his own hands. I'm sorry, Emily said. Just that. No advice, no silver lining, just the honest acknowledgement that some things were hard and didn't need to be made better, just witnessed. Dominic looked at her for a long moment. Thank you, he said, and the words came out different from the way she'd heard him say anything before. Not controlled, not measured, just real. She nodded. She stood up. She picked up her bag. Thursday, she said. Thursday, he said. She left. She sat in the car all the way home and said nothing and felt the shape of something changing in herself, in the situation, in whatever this was becoming, and she pressed her lips together and watched the city go by, outside the window, and told herself she was a professional, and this was a draw, and she was very, very good at knowing the difference. She was less certain of that than she'd been 3 weeks ago. And somewhere on the 30th floor of a building on the Upper East Side, she suspected, though she couldn't have proven it, that she wasn't the only one. The dinner invitation became a standing one. Emily told herself she noticed the moment it shifted the third Saturday when Dominic simply said 7 o'clock as she was leaving. No preamble, no question mark, like it had already been decided, and he was just relaying the logistics. She told herself she should have said something then, drawn a line, reminded herself of what this arrangement was and what it wasn't. She said 7 o'clock back and left, and that was that. The dinners were the strangest part of all of it, not because they were uncomfortable, they weren't, and that was precisely the problem. They were easy in a way that Emily had no framework for, because easy wasn't a word she associated with Dominic Castiano in any other context. In the hallway, he was contained. In the rare moments she glimpsed him on the phone, he was cold and precise, and spoke in a register that made the air feel different. But at that table with Antonio between them, conducting the conversation like a small and extremely self-satisfied orchestra conductor, something in him unclenched. Not completely, not carelessly, but enough that she could see the shape of who he was underneath the weight of everything he carried. He asked about her mother one evening. Not as small talk. Dominic didn't do small talk she'd learned. Every question he asked was a real one, but with a direct, genuine interest he applied to everything that actually mattered to him. She's stable, Emily said. The new medication is helping. She had a better week. Does she know about this? He gestured vaguely, meaning the apartment, the arrangement, all of it. She knows I have a tutoring position, Emily said carefully. She knows it pays well. And the rest, Emily looked at him. She'd worry. About the salary, about the name, Emily said honestly. A beat of silence. Antonio was very focused on his pasta. That's fair, Dominic said quietly. The honesty of it, the way he neither defended himself nor dismissed her concern, hit her somewhere she wasn't armored for. She looked back at her plate and told herself for the 100th time to be careful. It was on a Tuesday, 4 weeks into the arrangement, that everything cracked open. She was in the middle of a session with Antonio history, which he claimed to hate, and clearly didn't, because he'd spent the last 20 minutes arguing with passionate specificity about the motivations of a 14th century Florentine merchant, which was not the behavior of someone who hated history when the apartment changed. She felt it before she heard it. That shift in air pressure again, but different this time. Sharper. Wrong. Then she heard the voices in the hallway, 2 of them, both male, both low and urgent, in the particular way that people speak when they are trying not to be heard and failing, and then a door closing hard, and then silence, and then nothing. Antonio had stopped talking. He was looking at the doorway. His pencil was still in his hand, but he'd gone very still. And the stillness was the specific kind that Emily recognized from children who have learned to read a house, to listen to it, to feel its changes, because at some point the changes mattered and you needed to know. Keep going, Emily said quietly. Steady, normal. He looked at her. Something's wrong. I don't know that yet, she said. Do you? He was quiet for a moment. When it's something with his business, he said carefully, Marco comes. Marco only comes here when it can't wait. She absorbed this. Okay, she said. And when Marco comes, Dad gets quiet, Antonio said. Different quiet than usual. And then people start moving. As if on cue, she heard footsteps in the hallway. More than one set, quick, purposeful. Antonio put his pencil down. Emily kept her voice completely level. Antonio, look at me. He did. Is there a place in this apartment where you go when this happens? He studied her face for a moment, reading it the way he read everything. Then he nodded. Show me, she said. She didn't get the chance. Dominic appeared in the doorway before they'd moved, and the look on his face controlled, but with the quality underneath the control that she hadn't seen before. Something compressed and urgent told her immediately that whatever was happening was not small. Emily. He said her name the way he said everything when it was serious, stripped of anything extra, just the word itself. I need you to stay close to Antonio. Don't leave this floor. Sal is coming up. What's happening, she asked. A situation, he said. That's not an answer. He looked at her, a look that in another context might have been appreciation. No, he agreed, it's not. He came into the room. He crouched in front of Antonio, all the way down to eye level, which she noted, which mattered the way the body language of parents toward their children always tells you the most important things about them, and he put one hand on his son's shoulder. Hey, his voice was different now, quieter, the business register completely gone. You're okay, you hear me? I know, Antonio said. He wasn't performing calm, he actually was calm, the particular calm of a child who has been in this room before, done this math before, and trusts the person in front of him. Is it bad? Manageable, Dominic said. I need you to stay with Emily. Okay. Don't argue with Sal. I never argue with Sal. You argued with Sal last week about the radio station. That was a conversation. Dominic's jaw did the thing she'd seen it do at dinner, the microscopic release of tension that was his version of laughing. He squeezed his son's shoulder, once stood up and looked at Emily. "I'll explain when I can," he said. "You don't need to explain," she said. "Go." He went. Sal arrived on the floor 2 minutes later, a different Sal than the one who drove her she registered. Younger, taller, with the same disciplined stillness as the men from the restaurant. He positioned himself outside the room with a naturalness that told her he'd done it before, that it was a role he had in this household, that this was not the first time. Antonio sat across from Emily at the table. He didn't pretend to work. She didn't pretend either. "How many times?" she asked quietly. He looked at her. He knew what she was asking. "3 times I remember," he said. "Maybe more before I was old enough to know what I was remembering." "Were you scared the other times?" He considered this with genuine thought, which was his way. "The first time," he said, "because I didn't know the shape of it yet. The second time less. Now," he glanced toward the hallway. "Now I just want to know he's okay." She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers, not making it into anything. Just contact. Present. He didn't pull away. "He'll be okay," she said. "How do you know?" "Because he had enough time to crouch down and talk to you," she said. "If it was that bad, he would have been running." Antonio looked at her hand on his, then back up at her face. Something in his expression shifted, not the almost smile, something different, more serious. "You're smart," he said. "Elementary school teacher," she said. "We learn to think fast." "Is that why you're not scared right now?" She held his gaze. "I didn't say I wasn't scared." "You don't look it." "That's what I learned first," she said. "Looking it doesn't help anyone." He was quiet for a moment. "Then my dad does that too." "I know," she said. "I noticed." 2 hours. That was how long they sat there, the two of them, while sounds moved through the apartment around them. Footsteps, low voices, a phone ringing twice without being answered, a door opening and closing. Sal remained outside unmoving. Claire appeared once with water and sandwiches, her face professionally neutral, and Antonio thanked her with a politeness so automatic it broke Emily's heart a little, because it was the politeness of a child who had learned to be gracious in situations where he had no control. They talked. Not about anything important, or rather about things that felt important, in the way that small things do when the larger world is temporarily suspended. Antonio told her about a book he'd read last winter, a story about a boy who discovered a hidden world in an old map. Emily told him about a student she'd had in her last year of teaching, a girl named Rosie who'd refused to learn fractions for an entire semester and then one day cracked the entire concept in 40 minutes and cried because she was so furious it had taken her this long. Antonio laughed at that, a real laugh, the uncomplicated kind. She stored it, the sound of it, without meaning to. She was mid-sentence about Rosie when the room changed again. The footsteps had stopped. The apartment had gone into a different kind of quiet, not the tense, held breath quiet of before, but something releasing. She felt it. Antonio felt it too. She saw him register it, the slight loosening in his shoulders. Dominic appeared in the doorway at 11:47 p.m. He looked, she cataloged quickly, automatically tired. Not the soul tired from the kitchen table 3 weeks ago. Physically tired in the way of someone who has been managing something with their full body and mind for hours. His jacket was gone, his sleeves were rolled. There was a tension in his jaw that hadn't fully released yet. He looked at Antonio first, immediate, instinctive, reading him the same way Antonio read rooms. "All good," he said. "All good," Antonio said. Then Dominic looked at Emily. She expected him to say something logistical. "Sal will take you home. Thank you for staying. I'll explain on Thursday." The managed professional version, the version that kept the clean border between what this was and what it could theoretically become. Instead, he said, "Are you all right?" And the question was asked in the same register as the kitchen table 3 weeks ago, stripped of management, just real. Just him looking at her like her answer mattered, not professionally, but actually. "Yes," she said. "You've been here 4 hours?" "I know how to tell time." The corner of his mouth moved. "I'm aware," he said. Thank you for staying with him." A pause, small but significant. "For staying." "Of course," she said. She started to reach for her coat. "Emily." She stopped. He almost never said her name. Just her name, not Miss Caldwell, not in the formal tone, just Emily, and the difference in it was enough to make her go very still. "Sit down," he said, "please." Antonio excused himself with the tact of a child executing a strategy. She was now absolutely certain the 8-year-old had a strategy, had possibly had one since the restaurant, and then it was just the two of them at the table, and Dominic was across from her, and he was looking at her the way he looked at things he was deciding about. "I'm going to tell you something," he said, "and I want you to listen to all of it before you react. Can you do that?" "That depends on what it is," she said honestly. Something in his face almost smiled and didn't quite. "Fair," he said. "Okay, fair." He exhaled a controlled breath, deliberate, the kind that precedes something that costs something. The situation tonight was a message from a family that has been competing with mine for territory in this city for 11 years. It wasn't dangerous to anyone in this building, but it was meant to be noticed, and it will happen again. She held the information steady. "The people I deal with," he continued, "the world I operate in, I don't insult your intelligence by pretending you don't know what it is. You agreed to come here knowing the name, and you've been here 4 weeks and you've seen enough to have made conclusions." "I have," she said. "What are they?" She looked at him. "You're dangerous," she said. "You operate in a world where tonight was a small problem. You have security on a rotating schedule in your home. You have a driver who is also a bodyguard, and your 9-year-old knows how to read a lockdown the way other kids know how to read a weather change." She paused. "And you love your son more than you love any of the power, and you've been lonely for a very long time." The silence after that was enormous. Dominic looked at her across the table, and for the first time she could remember she couldn't read his expression at all, not because it was closed, but because it was open in a way that had no practiced shape. It was just his face, unmanaged. In the quiet of his own kitchen at midnight with his son down the hall, and this woman he had not expected sitting across from him. "Emily," he said. "Don't," she said quietly but clearly. "Don't manage it. Not right now." Another silence. "I don't know what to do with you," he said finally, and it was the most unguarded sentence she'd heard him say, which she understood was probably the most unguarded sentence he'd said to anyone in years. "You don't have to do anything with me," she said. "I'm just telling you what I see." "And what do you, Tim?" His voice was very low. She held his gaze. The honest answer was complicated and warm and frightening, and she was not ready to give it, yet she wasn't sure she'd ever be ready. So she said the part of it she could give. "I see a man who built walls to protect his son and forgot to leave a door." Dominic went very still. She picked up her coat. "Sal can take me home," she said. He didn't move. She was halfway to the door when he said, "I left a door." She stopped. She didn't turn around. "It's just been closed for a long time," he said. "That's different." The room was absolutely silent. She could hear her own heartbeat. She was aware of everything at once, the late hour, the length of the day, the specific way his voice sounded when he dropped every layer of management and just spoke. She turned around. He was looking at her. Not with the calculating attention of the restaurant, not with the professional distance of the hallway, with something simpler and heavier and more honest than either. "Thursday," she said. "Thursday," he said. She left out. In the car, Sal drove without speaking, and Emily sat with her coat in her lap and her hands pressed flat against her thighs and thought about what she was doing with extreme and total clarity for approximately 45 seconds before her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Not Dominic's assistant, different cadence, different area code. She answered. "Miss Caldwell?" Female voice, smooth, careful in a way that was too careful. "I apologize for the hour. My name is Sophia Marchetti. I believe we have some mutual acquaintances. I was hoping we could meet for coffee. I have some things I think you should know about the Castiano family, about what you've walked into." Emily's blood went cold. She kept her voice completely even. "How did you get this number?" "That's one of the things we should discuss in person," the woman said. "There's a great deal you don't know, and I genuinely think you deserve to know it before it's too late." The word "too late" landed in the car like a stone in still water. Emily looked out the window at the city, going past lit and anonymous and indifferent, and thought about a 9-year-old boy who knew the shape of lockdowns, and a man with a door he'd kept closed for years, and a job she'd said yes to because she had no other option, and had stayed in because she'd found something she hadn't expected. "Where?" she said. The woman gave an address. Emily memorized it. She hung up the phone. She sat in the dark of the moving car and felt a specific sensation of standing at a fork in a road she hadn't known she was walking on, looking at a direction she hadn't chosen, realizing that the choice of whether to go there was already in some way made. Because Emily Caldwell did not run from things. She had proved that in a restaurant, in a wine-soaked uniform, standing between a drunk man and a child. She did not run. What she hadn't known standing there in the restaurant was that not running had a cost. She was starting to understand what it was. She put her phone in her pocket. She pressed her lips together. And somewhere behind her, 40 floors up, she was certain, though she had no way of knowing, that Dominic Castiano was still sitting at his kitchen table, with his hands flat on the surface, and the look on his face that had no practiced shape, thinking about a door that had been closed for a long time, and what it meant that he'd said so. The coffee shop Sophia Marchetti had named was on the west side, small and unremarkable, the kind of place chosen specifically because nobody who mattered would be seen there. Emily arrived 8 minutes early. She ordered a black coffee she didn't want and sat with her back to the wall, which was something she'd never done before in her life and did now without thinking about it, and recognized in that automatic choice just how much the last 4 weeks had changed her without asking permission. Sophia arrived exactly on time. She was beautiful in the particular way of women who have spent years in rooms where beauty was a tool, deliberately, purposefully, with nothing left to chance. Late 30s, dark hair, a coat that cost more than Emily's monthly rent. She moved through the coffee shop with the ease of someone accustomed to being watched and having decided long ago not to mind. She sat across from Emily and smiled, and the smile was warm and convincing and didn't reach her eyes by approximately 3 millimeters. "Thank you for coming," Sophia said. "You said you had things I should know," Emily said. "So, tell me." Sophia studied her for a moment. "You're direct." "I'm tired," Emily said, "and you called me at midnight. So yes, I'm direct. What do you want?" Sophia wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "I want to help you," she said. "I know how that sounds. I know you have no reason to believe me. But I was where you are once, closer to this family than I should have been. And nobody warned me what it actually meant." Emily held her gaze. "Who are you, not your name? Who are you to them?" "My family and the Castianos have been in business together for 15 years, Sophia said carefully. "We are no longer in business together. And the way that ended," she paused, "that's what I want you to understand. What it looks like when Dominic Castiano decides someone is no longer useful to him." The name in her mouth sounded different than it did anywhere else. Harder, with a residue of something personal that Sophia was working to keep out of her voice and not quite managing. "What happened?" Emily asked. "My father trusted him," Sophia said. "Completely. 15 years of loyalty. And when a better arrangement came along, one that didn't include us, Dominic cut us off. Not just professionally." She leaned forward slightly. "My father lost everything. His business, his reputation, his standing. Within 6 months. And Dominic," her jaw tightened, "Dominic moved on. Like we had never existed." Emily sat with that. "I'm not saying he's the monster," Sophia said, and the careful calibration of that sentence told Emily it had been rehearsed. "I'm saying he's a man who makes decisions based on what serves him. And right now, you serve him. You've done something with his son that 4 other people couldn't do, and that makes you valuable. But valuable isn't the same as safe." She held Emily's eyes. "When the value changes, when Antonio doesn't need a tutor anymore, when Dominic finds another solution, what are you? You're a woman who knows too much about his household and his world, and women in that position have a very short list of options." The coffee shop was quiet around them. A couple at the next table was arguing softly about something domestic and normal and completely alien to the conversation Emily was sitting inside of. She looked at Sophia Marchetti. She thought about the rehearsed sentence. She thought about the 3 millimeter gap in the smile. She thought about a phone call at midnight from a number she'd never given to anyone outside the Castiano household. "How did you get my number?" Emily asked again. Sophia's expression didn't change. "I have contacts." "My number isn't public," Emily said. "I've had it for 2 years. The only people with it are my mother, my former colleagues, two friends, and everyone at Rosario's. She paused. And the Castiano household. A very brief silence. Someone gave it to you, Emily said. Someone inside. Sophia said nothing. Who? Emily said. That's not... Who? How? Harder this time. Not loud, certain. Sophia set down her coffee cup, and the warmth in her expression shifted into something more honest, which was actually colder. It doesn't matter who. What matters is the information. It matters enormously who, Emily said, because if someone inside that household gave you my number to orchestrate this conversation, then this isn't a warning. This is a boom, and I'm a piece being played. She stood up. She picked up her coat. I don't know what you're trying to accomplish. I don't know if your story about your father is true or half true or completely invented. But I know that I've been in that apartment for 4 weeks, and I know what I've seen with my own eyes, and I'm going to trust that over a midnight phone call from a woman who smiles like she's been taught to. Sophia's face went very still. You're making a mistake, she said. Maybe, Emily said, but it'll be mine. She left. She was in a cab 2 blocks away before her hands started shaking. Not from fear, from the particular adrenaline of having held a position under pressure and not known in the moment whether it was the right one. The shaking was her body's receipt for what her mind had just spent. She pressed her palms flat against her knees and breathed. The information she could verify someone had given Sophia her number. That was real. That was a problem regardless of everything else, because it meant there was someone in or adjacent to the Castiano household who was moving against Dominic using Emily as the board piece, and that someone knew her number and presumably knew enough about her to have calculated that a midnight warning would land. The question was whether to tell Dominic. The answer she knew before she finished asking was yes. Not because of loyalty, she was still sorting out what she owed and to whom, but because of Antonio. Because if someone inside that world was running a play against his father, that play had an endgame, and the endgame of plays like that rarely stayed clean. She got home at 1:30 a.m. She sat on her bed. She did not fall asleep. At 6:15, she called the number Dominic's assistant had given her for logistics. She didn't expect anyone to answer. Someone answered on the second ring. Miss Caldwell, not the assistant, Dominic. She paused. You are awake. I don't sleep much, he said, just factual. What is it? I need to talk to you, she said. Today, before Thursday. A beat. She could feel him reading the register of her voice across the silence. Are you all right? Yes, but I have something you need to know, and I'd rather say it in person. 12 o'clock, he said immediately. The office. Okay. She hung up. She looked at the ceiling. She thought not for the first time about the version of her life that had existed before Rosario's private room, the smaller, quieter, harder version where the biggest decision of any given week was whether the tips would cover the medication refill, and she thought about how thoroughly that life had been replaced by this one, and how fast it had happened, and how little she'd seen it coming. She thought about what Sophia had said. Valuable isn't the same as safe. Then she thought about a man crouching down to eye level with his son in the middle of a crisis, and the way he'd said I left a door at midnight in his kitchen, and the specific look on his face when she turned around. She closed her eyes. She got up. She got dressed. She went to see him. The 40th floor office felt different in the daytime, with the city spread out beyond the windows and the ordinary sounds of a working building underneath them. Dominic was behind his desk when she came in, actually behind it this time, which shifted the room's geometry, but he stood when she entered, which she'd noticed he always did, and gestured to the chairs, and she sat and he sat across from her, and she told him everything. All of it. The call, the address, Sophia Marchetti, the conversation, the number, the questions she'd asked, and the answers she hadn't gotten. She told it straight without editorializing, the way she'd learned to report things in the classroom, just what happened in order, and let the listener decide what it meant. Dominic listened without moving, without interrupting. His face was the closed version she'd learned to distinguish, now the open and the closed, processing, not responding. When she finished, the silence lasted long enough that she almost spoke into it. Then he said, You went? Yes. Alone at midnight? Yes. Emily, and just her name, with a weight in it she couldn't fully decode. I know, she said. You could have called me first. I wanted to see what she said. It could have been dangerous. It wasn't, she said. She's not dangerous in that way. She's dangerous in the way of someone running an information campaign. She wanted to shake me loose. She thought I'd come back scared and pull away from all of this. She held his gaze. She misjudged. The silence this time was different. She did, Dominic said quietly. He looked at her with something she'd stopped pretending she didn't recognize. Why? She held his gaze steadily. Because I told you I don't run from things. I meant it. Something moved through his expression fast and unguarded, the door swinging wider than he'd planned. He looked down at his desk. He put one hand flat on the surface. She'd noticed he did that when he was managing something internal, the hand flat grounding himself. The number, he said, his voice had shifted into the business register. Controlled, purposeful. Someone inside my circle gave it to her. I have 3 guesses, and none of them are surprises. I'll deal with it. I know you will, she said. He looked up. You're not worried. About that part, no. She paused. About other parts. Which parts? Parts, she looked at him directly. Sophia said that when people stop being useful to you, they disappear from your world. That you make decisions based on what serves you, and when the calculation changes, you move on. She said her father learned that. She paused. Is that true? The room was very still. Her father, Dominic said carefully, made an agreement with me and then violated the terms of that agreement to make a separate deal with a family that has since destroyed everything he built without my involvement. What I did was stop protecting someone who had already decided I wasn't his partner. He looked at her. That's not the story she told you. No, Emily said, it isn't. Do you believe me? I think both things can be true, she said. I think you stopped protecting him, and I think he'd made a choice that changed things, and I think she's still angry. That was real. Whatever the facts are, she's genuinely angry, which means she lost something she didn't think she was going to lose. He was quiet. I'm not asking you to justify your world to me, Emily said. I walked into it. That was my choice, she paused. I'm asking if the calculation with me is the same kind. The question landed exactly where she'd aimed it. Dominic looked at her for a long time. Not calculating, she could tell the difference now, just looking, taking in the question and everything it meant and everything she was really asking underneath it. No, he said, just that word, but the way he said it. Emily breathed. Okay, she said. Oh, yeah. She should have gone home. The conversation was done, the information delivered, the question answered. She should have thanked him and taken the elevator down and gone back to her apartment and processed all of this in the solitary, methodical way she'd learned to process things since her life had narrowed. She was standing to leave when he said, My son asked me something last night. She sat back down. Dominic's jaw worked slightly. Not to stress the other thing, the one that looked like the effort of deciding whether to say something you've decided to say. He asked me if I was happy. The room was very quiet. What did you tell him? Emily asked. I told him I was working on it. He looked at her. He said that wasn't an answer. He said, a pause, and she could see him deciding how much of this to give her and deciding to give her all of it. He said, Dad, Emily looks at you like she thinks you can be. You should probably figure out if she's right. Emily's chest did something complicated. He's 9, she said. He's terrifyingly perceptive, Dominic said. He comes by it. Honestly, she finished. The word she'd used in the hallway weeks ago, his mouth almost smiled. Emily. He said her name the way he'd said it last night in the kitchen. Stripped of management. Just real. I'm not a safe man. I'm not going to pretend to be one. My world has a weight to it, and everyone who comes close enough eventually feels it. I know that. I have tried. He stopped. Started again. I have tried very hard to make sure Antonio doesn't feel it more than he has to. That's the thing that matters most to me. Everything else? He opened his hand slightly on the desk, a gesture she hadn't seen him make. Open, undefended. Everything else I've been less careful about. She understood what he was saying, what he wasn't saying, both of them. I know, she said softly. Dominic, I know. He looked at her across the desk, and the distance between them was physical and other both at once. Stay for lunch, he said. She almost said no. She had the word ready. She had 3 good reasons for it, lined up, all of them sensible, all of them real. Okay, she said. They ate in the kitchen, not the formal dining room, the kitchen which felt like a choice, and the conversation was different from dinners with Antonio present. Quieter in the way that 2 adults are quiet together when they've passed a certain point of pretending. He asked about her mother. She asked about a piece of art on the counter that turned out to be Antonio's, an ambitious watercolor of the sea that showed the boy's structural understanding of color. He talked about his son in the way he rarely did, not reporting, but just talking the way you talk about something you love when you've stopped worrying about being overheard. He wants to be a marine biologist, Dominic said. Last month it was an architect. Before that, a conductor. He's very serious about each one. He'll probably be all 3, Emily said. God help whoever's in charge of his schedule, Dominic said. And it was so dry and so human and so far from the gravity of the 40th floor office that Emily laughed, a real laugh, sudden and uncalculated. And Dominic looked at her when she laughed with the expression of a man who has just discovered something he hadn't known he was looking for. The expression lasted only a second. He looked back at his coffee, but she'd seen it. She filed it next to all the other things she'd been filing in the growing cabinet of moments she carried home with her after every visit and tried not to examine too closely when she was alone. She was reaching for her coat at 2 o'clock when her phone rang. Her mother's care facility. The number she knew by heart in the way you know numbers that terrify you. She answered immediately. Hello? The nurse's voice was calm, but with the particular careful calm of clinical training managing a real situation. Miss Caldwell, your mother had an episode this morning. She's stable, I want to say that first. She's stable and she's resting. But the specialist wants to speak with you today, if possible, about adjusting her care level. It's not an emergency, but it needs to be addressed soon. Emily closed her eyes. I'll come now. She hung up. She turned, already reaching for her coat, and ran directly into Dominic, who had apparently stood when she answered the phone and was now 2 feet away, with an expression that had already shifted into something alert and present. My mother, Emily said. Her voice was level. She was already in the mode she'd had for 3 years, the one that ran on a different track than feeling that just handled things. She's okay, I need to go. Sal will take you, he said immediately. I can take a cab. Sal will take you, he said again, and the repetition had a quality that she recognized, the quality of a man who is not comfortable being unable to do something and is doing the one thing available to him. Please, she looked at him. Please, he said one more time, quieter. Okay, she said. He walked her to the elevator himself. He pressed the button and they stood in the brief charged silence of people who have more to say than the moment allows. Let me know, he said, how she is. I will. The elevator opened. She stepped in. She turned around and he was standing there watching her go with the look she'd seen last night and this morning, and in between the open door too wide now to close easily. Maybe too wide to close at all. And she thought about what Antonio had said. Emily looks at you like she thinks you can be. She thought about whether the boy was right. She thought she might be. The doors closed. The specialist's name was Dr. Keene, a quiet, deliberate woman who had been managing her mother's condition for 2 years and spoke with the particular honesty that Emily had always appreciated and sometimes dreaded. The progression is moving faster than we'd hoped, Dr. Keene said. Not dramatically, I don't want to alarm you unnecessarily, but her cognitive response times have slowed measurably since February, and I think we need to look at full residential transitions sooner than we'd planned, within the next 60 days ideally. Emily sat across from her in the small office and held the information the way she'd learned to hold the hard ones, not pushing away, not drowning, just holding. What does that cost? Emily asked. Dr. Keene named a number. In another life, the Rosario's life, the double shift life, the running in place life, that number would have ended the conversation. It would have been the wall, and she would have driven herself against it quietly and alone and figured out some partial solution that wasn't enough and called it what she had. She thought about the folder on the 40th floor, the line Dominic's lawyer had walked her through 6 weeks ago that she had read and reread and still wasn't entirely sure she'd believed. Medical costs, including residential care transition, covered in full. No conditions, no timeline. "I need to make a call," Emily said. She stepped into the hallway. She dialed. He answered on the second ring again. She was starting to understand this was simply how he was present, available, in the way of someone who has learned that the people he cares about sometimes need him and has made the decision to be reachable. "How is she?" he said before she could speak. "Stable," Emily said, "but she needs to move to full residential care. Sooner than expected." A pause. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." "Always," he said. "The medical coverage we discussed," she said. "Is it real?" "The residential care, the full transition, is that actually something you can do? Or was it a number on a page that meant something different in practice?" The pause that followed was very brief. "Give me the facility name and Dr. Keen's direct line," he said. "I'll have my people contact them today. Everything will be arranged before you leave the building." Emily stood in the hospital hallway and held the phone and felt 3 years of running in place catch up with her all at once, the weight of it, and then the sudden disorienting absence of it, like a bag she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was on her back until someone took it off. Her eyes stung. She pressed her fingers against them briefly. Stopped. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steady. "Emily?" His voice across the phone was the unmanaged version, the real one. "You don't have to thank me." "I know," she said. "I'm doing it anyway." A silence, warm and complicated and full of things neither of them had found language for yet. "Go be with her," he said. "I'll handle the rest." She went on. Her mother was awake when she came in. Smaller than Emily's memory always prepared her for this was the persistent cruelty of progressive illness, that you adjusted constantly and then forgot you'd adjusted and were startled again at how much had changed. But her eyes were clear today, which wasn't always true, and when Emily came in, she smiled with the full warmth of someone who had not yet forgotten how to do that. "You look different," her mother said, studying her with the intuition of a woman who had known Emily's face longer than Emily had. "I'm tired," Emily said. She pulled the chair close. "No," her mother said. "Must that? Something else?" She tilted her head. Something happened. Emily looked at her mother, this woman who had worked 2 jobs for 15 years, so Emily could go to college, who had never once in Emily's childhood let her see the weight of what it cost, who had modeled with extraordinary quiet consistency the same principle Emily had acted on in a restaurant 3 weeks ago. You don't run, you step forward, you handle it, and she thought about everything that had happened since that night. "Something happened," Emily confirmed. "Good something or bad something?" Emily thought about it honestly. "Both," she said. "At the same time, I'm not sure I can tell them apart yet." Her mother reached out and covered Emily's hand with hers, thin now, lighter than it used to be, but the gesture exactly the same as it had always been. The same as Emily had done with Antonio across the table during the lockdown. She noticed that the echo of it and felt it somewhere deep. "Tell me," her mother said. Emily looked at her. She started talking. She told her everything. She left the facility at 6 o'clock. The evening had gone cold and the city moved around her with its indifferent, relentless energy, and she stood on the sidewalk for a moment just breathing. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number she now recognized. The facility confirmed. "Everything is arranged. Dr. Keen has been contacted. Your mother can transfer whenever she's ready." Emily read it 3 times. Then below it, after a pause that she could somehow feel even in text, "How are you?" She stood on the sidewalk and looked at those 3 words. She typed back, "Ask me Thursday." 3 seconds. "Then I'll ask you Thursday." She put her phone in her pocket. She started walking. And somewhere in the complicated, frightening, inexplicable thing her life had become over the last 4 weeks, she found underneath all of it, underneath the danger and the uncertainty and the midnight phone calls and the locked-down apartments and the woman with the 3-millimeter smile, something that felt cautiously and without guarantees like ground. Not safety, not certainty. She wasn't naive enough to think that's what this was. But ground, something she could stand on while she figured out the rest. She kept walking. Behind her, the city went on. Ahead of her, Thursday waited. And somewhere between those 2 things, Emily Caldwell was beginning to understand that the choice she'd thought she made 6 weeks ago, yes to a salary, yes to a rescue from impossible circumstances, was not actually the choice she'd made at all. She had said yes to something much larger than that. She was just now understanding the size of it. And for the first time standing in the cold evening air of a city that had never particularly cared about her, she was not afraid of how large it was. She was something closer to ready. Thursday came the way important days always do, dressed like an ordinary one. The car at 8:47, Sal with his 4 words, the elevator that moved in silence. Claire at the door with her professional warmth and a look in her eyes that said she knew something had shifted in this household and was privately glad about it. All of it the same as every other Thursday for 6 weeks, except that it was nothing like every other Thursday, and Emily knew it, and she suspected everyone in the building knew it, and the only question was what they were all going to do about it. Antonio was at the table, book open chair pushed out, pencil already in hand. He looked up when she came in, and his face did something immediate and unguarded. Not the almost smile, not the careful neutrality, just plain gladness, uncomplicated and real. And Emily felt it hit her the way his first drawing had hit her in the restaurant, right in the center of something she'd stopped protecting a while ago. "You're here," he said. "Thursday," she said. "That's when I come." "I know." He looked at her with his father's eyes wearing his own expression. "But last week was a lot. I wasn't sure you'd—" He stopped himself. "Antonio." She sat down, looked at him directly. "I told you once, I came anyway. That hasn't changed." He studied her, then slowly he nodded, not the nod of a reassured child, but of someone who has taken in information and filed it as verified. The Castiano way of receiving truth. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. "Pick up your pencil." He picked it up, but he was smiling this time fully. No almost about it, and she let herself look at it for exactly 1 second before she opened the book. The session ran long. It always did now, because Antonio had stopped sandbagging entirely, and the full scope of what his mind could do when it was engaged was extraordinary. And Emily was not going to be the person who cut that short by watching a clock. They went through history, pivoted into a spontaneous and somewhat heated discussion about whether mathematics was discovered or invented. Antonio landed firmly on invented, with arguments she had to actually work to counter, and ended up 40 minutes off schedule, both of them slightly out of breath from arguing in the best possible way. When she finally called it, he sat back in his chair with the satisfied expression of someone who has thoroughly enjoyed being challenged. "You almost agreed with me," he said. "I considered your argument," she said. "That's different." You paused for 6 seconds. "I was thinking." "You were agreeing and then decided not to." She looked at him. "You're insufferable when you read." "Dad says the same thing." The satisfaction deepened. He also pauses. Emily gathered the books. "Where is your dad?" "He said he'd be back by 11. Antonio glanced at the clock. That was 11 minutes ago. A beat. "He's never late." She felt it then, a small specific awareness, like the air pressure shift she'd learned to read in this apartment. Something was different. Not wrong, different. "I'm sure he's—" The door opened. Dominic came in, the way he came in when something had happened, not visibly altered, because he was never visibly altered, but with a quality of compressed energy that Emily could read now the way she read everything about him, which was to say clearly and against her better judgment, and with a specificity that told her she'd been paying attention for longer than she'd admitted. He stopped when he saw her. Something in his face went quiet, not the managed quiet, the real one. "You're still here," he said. 11 minutes, Antonio said without looking up from packing his pencils. "You said 11 and 1. "I know, I'm sorry." He said it to his son directly, which she'd noticed he always did, never the vague room apology, always the specific person. "I got caught up. Emily and I were discussing whether math is real." "It's real," Dominic said automatically. "She thinks so too," Antonio said, "but she at least considered my argument." Dominic looked at Emily over his son's head. There was something in the look, quick, private, carrying the weight of things said and unsaid since Tuesday, and she held it for exactly a beat before she looked back at Antonio. "I'll see you Saturday," she told the boy. Antonio stood up. He picked up his bag. He looked at her, then at his father, then back at her, with the expression of his 9-year-old strategy, operating at full efficiency. "I'm going to find Claire," he announced, which was not something he had ever announced before. He crossed to his father, received the brief, firm hand on his shoulder that was Dominic's physical vocabulary of love, and left the room. The apartment went quiet. Dominic looked at her. She looked at him. The table was between them, and Tuesday was between them, and everything since the restaurant was between them, and it was both too much and completely insufficient. Something happened, she said. Not a question. This morning, he said. The family I told you about the Marchetti situation, the breach 3 weeks ago, it escalated. He moved to the counter, stood. They made an approach, directly to me. Not a message this time, a meeting. Emily went still. What kind of approach? The formal kind, he said. The kind that means they want to end it, not continue it. They named terms. He looked at her. One of the terms was information about my household. Specifically, he paused. About you. The word landed in the silence like a stone. Me, she said. Someone had told them you were here, that you mattered. He said the last word carefully, like he'd chosen it precisely. They thought that made you leverage. Her pulse spiked. She kept her face even. What did you say? I said no. Flat, absolute. And I told them clearly what would happen if they moved in your direction. Or in Antonio's. His jaw held the tension she knew now, the long, clenched tension of a man carrying the weight of every consequence in every direction at once. It's handled. They accepted the terms I countered with. It's done. Is it actually done, she asked? Or is it done the way things are done in your world, which means that it's dormant? He looked at her. Both, honestly. She appreciated that he didn't soften it. She'd learned that was one of the things about him when he thought she could handle the truth he gave it to her. He'd been revising upward his estimate of what she could handle since the restaurant. And the person inside who gave Sophia my number, she asked. Handled, he said. One word. She didn't ask for more than that. She looked at him. He looked at her. The kitchen was ordinary and warm and entirely incongruent with the conversation they were having. And she thought about how much of this life was that the extreme and the ordinary pressed up against each other, constantly, no buffer. Dominic, she said. Emily, he said at the same time. They both stopped. The corner of his mouth moved. You first, he said. She breathed. I need to say something to you, and I need to say it straight, because that's the only way I know how to say things, and I need you to let me finish before you respond. He nodded. He went still in the way that meant he was giving her his full attention, which was something very few people had ever been given, and which she'd stopped pretending didn't mean something to her. I came here for my mother, she said. That was true, and I stayed because of Antonio, and that was true too. But somewhere in the last 6 weeks, something changed, and I've been watching it change and telling myself it was professional and manageable and that I had it very clearly categorized, and I don't. She held his eyes. I don't have it categorized, and I've stopped being able to pretend I do, which means I need to either walk away from this before it becomes something I can't walk away from, or I need to say this out loud. She paused. So I'm saying it out loud. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Saying what? He said quietly. Specifically. That I'm not here because of the salary anymore, she said. I haven't been for a while. The room went completely still. Dominic looked at her for a long moment, the full unguarded look, the door open all the way, and she could see everything behind it now. All the things that had been building in every hallway exchange and every kitchen conversation and every dinner and every late night and every moment, he'd looked at her like she was worth actually seeing. I know, he said. I know you know, she said. I need to hear what you're going to do about it. He came around the table, not rushed. He never rushed anything, but with the deliberateness of a man who has made a decision and is following it to its conclusion. He stopped in front of her, close enough that the distance was no longer deniable, and he looked at her the way she'd first noticed in the restaurant and had been trying to correctly identify ever since. He was looking at her like she mattered, not like she was useful, like she mattered. I have spent 11 years, he said, making every decision based on what protects this family, what protects Antonio, and I have been very good at it, and it has cost me things I didn't realize I was paying until they were gone. He looked at her steadily. I don't know how to do this. I want to be honest about that. I don't know how to be with someone in a way that isn't managed or strategic or contained. I've forgotten if I ever knew. He paused. But I know that since the night in the restaurant, I have thought about you every single day, and I know that when something happens, my first instinct is to tell you And I know that my son, his voice changed slightly, just a fraction. My son, who has spent 2 years not trusting anyone who came through that door, follows you around the apartment when he thinks neither of you is being watched. Emily's throat tightened. And I know, Dominic said, that when you walked out of this building on Tuesday and I watched you from the window, I was aware that I wanted you to come back. Not Thursday, that afternoon. And he stopped, steadied. I am asking you to stay, not for Antonio, not for the arrangement. I'm asking you to stay because this is the first time in years that something in my life has felt. He searched for the word. Real, Emily said softly. He looked at her. Real, he confirmed. She was silent for a moment, feeling the weight of it, feeling what it cost him to say it and what it was going to cost her to answer. Your world is dangerous, she said. Yes. It's going to stay dangerous. Yes. I'm not a person who can be managed or contained or kept at a useful distance, she said. I am going to say exactly what I think and push back when I think you're wrong and refuse to disappear into the background of your life, and that is not going to change. Something in his face went warm and certain. I know, he said. I'm counting on it. She looked at him for one more moment. She thought about Sophia Marchetti and midnight phone calls and lockdowns and all the very good reasons a sensible woman would walk out of this kitchen and not come back. She thought about all of it, held it clearly, without flinching. Then she thought about a little boy who hadn't drawn for anyone in a year and had drawn her in 20 minutes. She thought about a man who'd crouched to eye level with his son in the middle of a crisis. She thought about 3 words in a text message at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday evening. How are you okay, she said. He reached out and took her hand. Just that. His hand around hers steady and certain. The way he did everything, not tentative, not performing, just real. And she felt it through her whole body, the simple, enormous fact of it. Okay, he said back. From down the hall, at a volume that suggested he had been waiting with considerable impatience for the silence to end. Is everyone done talking? Dominic closed his eyes briefly. Emily pressed her lips together. Antonio, Dominic called, because Claire made lunch and it's getting cold. A pause. And also, I'd like to come back in now. Come back in, Dominic said. Antonio appeared in the doorway with the expression of a man whose campaign has concluded successfully. He looked at his father's hand holding Emily's. He looked at both their faces. He nodded once with the gravity of a general receiving a field report. Good, he said. Okay, lunch. He went to the table and sat down and began organizing his placemat with intense focus, and Emily looked at Dominic and Dominic looked at Emily, and the laugh that came out of her was sudden and full and real. And when she laughed, he laughed too. Actually laughed uncontained, the rusty, genuine sound of something unlocking. And Antonio looked up from his placemat with profound satisfaction. I told you, the boy said to no one in particular. You told us, Emily agreed. The weeks that followed were not simple. She hadn't expected them to be. Simple was not available in Dominic Castiano's world, and she'd stopped wanting it to be the price of admission. There were complications. There were evenings when the phone rang and the call took him away, and she sat with Antonio doing homework and didn't ask questions and didn't require explanations, and he always came back and always looked at her when he came through the door with the same specific look that meant still here, still yours, still deciding to be both. There were conversations they had sometimes late into the night after Antonio was asleep that were difficult and honest and didn't always end neatly because Emily did what she told him she would do. She said what she thought, she pushed back when she believed that he was wrong. She refused to make herself smaller than she was, and he listened in the way she'd come to trust completely with his full attention, processing, not defending. And sometimes he changed his position, and sometimes he held it, and both were real. She kept her apartment for 2 months. It felt important, the keeping of it. The door that was hers alone. She let it go on a Saturday in October, which happened to be the same day her mother moved to the residential facility, the one Dr. Keene had recommended, the one that was clean and warm, and staffed by people who spoke to her mother like she was still wholly herself, which she was. Emily sat with her mother for 4 hours that first day. Her mother held her hand and asked about the man she'd been asking about the man since Emily had told her in the hospital. And Emily told her honestly that it was complicated and real and she was figuring it out. Is he good to you? Her mother asked. Emily thought about it. The real version, not the easy version. He's learning to be, she said, and so am I. Her mother looked at her with the full, clear-eyed love of someone who has known you your entire life. That's the honest answer, she said. I raised you right. You raised me to step in front of things, Emily said. That's what started all of this. Her mother smiled. Did I raise you to regret it? Emily thought about a drawing of a horse, a child's voice saying because you didn't run away, a man laughing in his kitchen like he'd forgotten he knew how. No, she said, you did not. The twist arrived on a Monday, which was the one while Emily didn't come to the apartment. She was at her mother's facility when Dominic called, not the assistant, him directly, which she'd learned meant it was either important or personal, and often both. I need to tell you something, he said. She stepped into the hallway. Tell me. Sophia Marchetti came to see me this morning. He paused, alone, without her family's knowledge from what I can determine. She came to a beat she could feel him choosing. She came to apologize. Emily stood very still. For what specifically? For the call, he said. For the approach. For what she said to you. He paused again. She told me the story she gave you, the one about her father, was half true. The half she left out was that her father had asked her to make the approach. It was his play. She came to tell you herself, but didn't have your number anymore, so she came to me instead. Emily absorbed this. What we know? She said he stopped, and she heard something in the pause that she recognized, something that cost him. She said watching what happened to her father's pride over the last 6 weeks, watching him run every play he had left, and watch each one fail, she decided she was done being a piece in his game. She said she came because she thought you deserved the truth. Another pause. And because she said you were the first person who looked at her like she was being calculated. And she respected it even though it wasn't what she'd wanted. Emily was quiet for a long moment. What did you say to her? She asked. I thanked her, he said. And I told her the terms of peace with her family still stood regardless of her father's plays, and that if she wanted to build something separate from him going forward, that door existed. He paused. She cried. She tried not to. She didn't quite manage it. Emily thought about the 3mm smile, the rehearsed sentence, the genuine anger underneath all of it. She thought about a woman who had spent years being a piece in other people's games and had finally, at some cost to herself, chosen not to be. Good, Emily said. That was the right thing. You're not surprised, he said. I'm not, she said. I told you, the anger was real. Real anger usually has real reasons underneath it. A silence, warm, full of things they'd gotten better at not needing to say out loud. Come for dinner, he said. It's Monday. I know what day it is, she smiled, facing the hallway wall of her mother's facility on a Monday, with her whole rerouted life arranged around her, like a landscape she was still learning to read. I'll be there at 7, she said. Sal will come at 6:47, he said. She laughed. She hung up. She came back to the apartment that evening to find Antonio had set the table, all 3 places, with a formality that he'd clearly decided was appropriate for the occasion. Whatever occasion he'd decided this was, there were actual cloth napkins folded, which she was fairly certain Claire had been enlisted to help with. You set the table, Emily said. It was a special occasion, Antonio said. What's the occasion? He looked at her with his father's eyes. You gave up your apartment today, he said. She stared at him. How did you? Dad mentioned it, he said with the perfect innocence of someone who had definitely asked directly. We thought it deserved acknowledgement. She looked at Dominic, who was in the kitchen with a contained, slightly helpless expression of a man whose 9-year-old regularly outmaneuvers him. He asked, Dominic said. I answered. You could have said it was private, she said. He looked at me. He always looks at you. He did it with a specific intensity that means he already mostly knows and is verifying, Dominic said. I find I can't lie to that particular look. I don't know where he learned it. I learned it from you, Antonio said, sitting down. Dominic looked at Emily. Emily looked at Dominic. This time they both laughed at the same time, and Antonio, highly satisfied, unfolded his cloth napkin and placed it in his lap with the poise of a seasoned host. Dinner was loud that night. Antonio had opinions about everything as usual, and he'd prepared what appeared to be a list of topics he wanted to cover. and the conversation moved fast and warm and fully present, and Emily sat in the middle of it and felt with a clarity that required no analysis that this was the shape of what she'd said yes to. Not the danger or the complexity or the weight of Dominic's world, though all of that was real. The three of them at a table arguing pleasantly about marine biology and whether pasta shapes actually affected the taste and the correct way to fold a map. This was what she'd walked into when she'd stepped between a drunk man and a child in a restaurant 6 weeks ago. She hadn't known. She was glad she hadn't, in a way, because if she'd known, she might have calculated. And calculating would have told her it was too complicated, too dangerous, too asymmetric, too much, and she would have missed all of it. Later, after Antonio was in bed, having extracted a promise from both of them that they would finish the marine biology debate Saturday with materials, Emily stood with Dominic at the kitchen counter. Both of them with coffee. They weren't really drinking, and the apartment was quiet around them. In the specific way it went quiet when the boy was asleep and the world had contracted to just the two of them. "Are you scared?" Dominic asked. She looked at him. "Of what, this?" He gestured slightly, the apartment, the life, all of it. "What you've stepped into." She thought about it honestly, the way she'd learned he respected and the way she'd always anyway preferred. "Yes," she said. "Some of it. The parts I can't see yet. The parts of your world that are going to press against this eventually, because that's what your world does." She held his gaze. "But not of this, not of you." A pause. "Not of him." "He's going to make everything harder," Dominic said. "He's going to push every boundary, ask every question, and be completely correct about things at deeply inconvenient moments." "I know," Emily said. "I'm counting on it." He looked at her. The door was all the way open. She'd stopped expecting it to close. "I meant what I said," he told her. "I will protect this. You. Him. What we're building here. Whatever it takes." "I know," she said again. "And I need you to hear what I'm going to say back." She turned to face him fully. "I don't need protecting. I need a partner. There is a difference, and if you can do that, if you can let me stand beside you instead of behind you, then we'll be fine." The silence after that held everything she'd meant and everything he was understanding. "I can do that," he said, the way he said it, not quick, not easy, but certain. The voice of a man who has examined what's being asked and found he's capable of it and is telling you the truth. She believed him. She reached up and put her hand flat against his jaw, the jaw that had been clenched for 20 years, and felt it release slow and real under her palm. "Okay then," she said. He covered her hand with his. He looked at her with the full, undefended look that she was the only person to have earned. "Okay," he said. Meanwhile, 3 months later, Emily Caldwell's mother moved into her room at the facility and placed a drawing on her bedside table. A horse carefully lined with a small, straight-backed figure beside it. She'd taken it from Emily without explanation. Emily had let her keep it. 3 months later, Antonio Castiano sat in his first biology elective arranged with considerable logistical effort by both his father and his tutor, and spent 2 hours so absorbed he forgot to eat his lunch. 3 months later, Dominic Castiano sat across from a contract that would bring the Marchetti account back into legitimate business, with his firm, Sophia's signature, on it, not her father's, and signed it with a particular quality of deliberateness that meant he'd made a choice he intended to keep. And 3 months later, on a Thursday at 8:47 a.m., the car arrived. Emily came down from the apartment she now shared, not from a cab or a train. She got in and Sal said his 4 words, "Good morning, Ms. Caldwell." Except that he'd started saying 5 ever since September, and the 5th word was her name differently warmly in the way of someone who has decided you're staying. "Good morning, Sal," she said. They went up. Antonio was at the table, not with the preemptive book anymore. He'd dropped that pretense sometime in August when it had become unnecessary. He was working genuinely on something he'd started the day before and wanted to finish. And he looked up when she came in with the direct, unguarded gladness as he'd stopped trying to moderate. Dominic was in the kitchen. He looked up when she came in. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, the full, real, unmanaged look, the one she was still the only person to have earned, and the corner of his mouth moved into the shape she'd cataloged first in a restaurant across a private room above a wine-stained uniform. Not almost, not the ghost of one, just a smile. His. Real. "Thursday," he said. "Thursday," or she said back. She sat down, she opened the book. Antonio picked up his pencil. Outside, the city went on being exactly what it was, loud and indifferent and full of ordinary people, living lives that would never intersect with this apartment or this family or this woman who had stepped forward when everyone else would have stepped back. Emily Caldwell had been a struggling waitress. She had worked a double shift. She had carried a tray and made herself invisible in a room full of people who didn't notice her. And then a child had needed protecting, and she had not thought she had just moved, and everything that mattered had begun exactly there in a single unplanned moment of choosing not to flinch. She had not known what it would cost her. She had not known what it would give her. She knew now. She opened the book and began.